You're a builder. You've got to measure the exact square footage of a perfectly curved, wavy wall. But the only tool in your toolbox is a completely rigid, straight ruler. Sounds impossible, right? How do you measure a smooth, continuous curve using nothing but straight lines? Well, that is the exact mathematical puzzle we're going to solve today. By the end of this explainer, you'll know exactly how to calculate the true area of completely irregular, curved shapes. We're going to break down the concept of approximating areas, master the sigma formula to do all the heavy lifting for us, and apply this whole process to real-life examples. Let's dive right in. Section 1. The curved area problem. To figure this out, we're actually going to steal a trick from the ancient Greek mathematician Archimedes. He used something called the method of exhaustion, which basically means filling a curved area with smaller, familiar shapes like rectangles. To visualize why this works, think about the screen you're looking at right now. A curved circle on a digital screen looks perfectly smooth to your eye, right? But if you zoom in close enough, it's actually just made of tiny, rigid square pixels. If your pixels are large, the curve looks blocky and kind of jagged. But if you shrink those pixels down and crank up the resolution, that curve becomes perfectly smooth. In our math today, shrinking the width of our measurement rectangles works exactly like increasing the resolution of a digital image. The thinner the rectangles, the tighter and more accurate our estimate becomes. But here's the catch. Adding up hundreds or thousands of tiny rectangular areas requires some serious math, which is why we need a shortcut. Section 2. Mastering sigma notation. Enter the Greek capital letter sigma. Now, I know it looks a little intimidating, but it's really just a compact mathematical command that simply means, hey, add all these terms together. Notice that little letter I at the bottom? We call this the index, or the dummy variable. Think of it as a tracker. It tells us our starting value, which is usually 1, and that n sitting at the very top, that tells us the exact ending value where we can finally stop adding. Let's walk through a quick textbook example to see this in action. Say we have the sigma command to sum the expression 3 to the power of I, from I equals 1 to 5. Here's exactly how you unpack it. Step 1, plug in the index. Put a 1 in for I, and you get 3 to the power of 1, which is just 3. Step 2, you increment. Move up to 2, so 3 squared, which is 9. And you just keep doing this all the way up to 5. Step 3, add them all up. 3 plus 9 plus 27 plus 81 plus 243. That quickly yields 363. See how much cleaner that is than writing out that entire massive string of numbers? Now you might be wondering, wait, do I literally always have to calculate every single term manually? Thankfully, no way. Sigma notation comes with some absolutely crucial properties that act as built-in shortcuts. For instance, if you have a constant number inside your sum, you can just factor it entirely out to the front. Got complex sums and differences? You can just split those apart into separate, bite-sized sigma operations. And most importantly, mathematicians have already done the hard work of proving formulas for adding up long lists of basic integers, squared integers, or cubed integers. Just to show you the absolute power of these shortcuts, what if I asked you to add up the cubes of the first 10 integers, like 1 cubed plus 2 cubed plus 3 cubed, all the way to 10 cubed? Sounds exhausting, right? But if you use the standard formula for consecutive integers cubed, which is n squared times n plus 1 squared, all divided by 4, you literally just plug in 10 for n. Instantly, you reveal the sum is exactly 13,025. No manual addition required. It's a real game changer. Section 3. Approximating with rectangles. Okay, so now that we've got our mathematical shorthand locked down, we need to figure out how to perfectly size our columns so we can slide them under a curve. The formula for this is delta x equals b minus a divided by n. This gives us the uniform width of every single rectangle we're going to squeeze under there. Think about it. If we're looking at a curved area on a graph that starts at point A and ends at point B, we just subtract a from b to find the total distance. Then, we divide that distance by n, which is just the number of rectangles we want to use. This guarantees every single rectangle is the exact same width. But wait, here is a really common spot where students get tripped up. To find the area of a rectangle, you multiply width by height, right? Well, we have the width. But if the curve is sloped, the height of the curve on the left side of our rectangle is different from the height on the right side. So do we evaluate the rectangle's height by letting its left corner touch the curve or its right corner? Section 4, left versus right endpoints. That is an excellent question, and the answer is, well, you can actually do either. It just depends on which approximation model you choose to build. We have the left endpoint approximation, represented by L sub n. In this model, you construct your rectangle so that its top left corner perfectly touches the curve. so the height is based entirely on the left side of that subinterval. In contrast, the right endpoint approximation, R sub n, constructs the rectangle so that its top right corner touches the curve. Let's look at a concrete example to see why this choice actually matters. Take this simple upward-sloping curve f of x equals x squared, evaluated from 0 to 2. If we use n equals 4 wide rectangles in the left endpoint method, our rectangles sit underneath the curve and we get an estimated area of 1.75. But if we swap to the right endpoint method, our rectangles poke up above the curve, giving us an area of 3.75. I mean, that is a massive discrepancy. Because we only used 4 blocky rectangles, our pixels are way too big, creating these huge pockets of empty white space or overhanging blocks. So, how do we fix this massive gap between our left and right estimates? Well, ask yourself, what did we say about the digital screen resolution earlier? What if we dramatically shrink our rectangles and use, say, 32 of them instead of 4? Check out this data trend. This is for a slightly different curve, but the pattern is exactly the same. When n equals 4, the gap between the left estimate of 750 and the right estimate of 850 is huge. But as we double the rectangles to 8, they start getting closer. And by the time we slice that area into 32 tiny razor-thin rectangles, the extra white space practically vanishes. The left estimate is 794 and the right estimate is 806. Both of these estimates are zeroing in or converging on the exact true area of the curve, which is 8. This convergence, this is literally the magical aha moment of calculus. Section 5. Riemann sums explained. Now that we've seen how shrinking our rectangles perfectly zeroes in on the true area, we can formalize this whole process. Enter the Riemann sum. This is a generalized estimate of area using the sum of the function evaluated at xi star times our width delta x. And the real beauty here, that xi star represents literally any point within the subinterval's width. Left edge, right edge, actually scratch that. It could be the exact middle or even completely random. It really doesn't matter. As long as you pick a point to establish the height for each rectangle and add them all up, you are performing a Riemann sum. It's named after Bernard Riemann, the 19th century mathematician who brilliantly formalized this entire method. And this perfectly leads us to our grand conclusion, beautifully summarized by this quote from our source. Taking a limit allows us to calculate the exact area under the curve. Think about it. If 32 rectangles gave us a great estimate, what happens if we push n to an infinite number of rectangles? The width of each rectangle shrinks to 0, the errors vanish completely, and our Riemann sum transforms into the exact perfect area. Taking this logical process to infinity is exactly what unlocks our next major lecture, the definite integral. But for now, the absolute key takeaway is this. No matter how irregular or impossible a curved problem seems, you can always solve it by breaking it down into small, straight, manageable pieces. So if we can do this for flat 2D areas, what happens if we try to measure the volume of a crazy 3D shape? We'll explore exactly that next time.